Hello everyone, it's me Uncle John. Today I am going to read S3 3087 Harry Gets an Uncle by Barbara and Ford. Summary of the story is this. Harry is worried about being the right ring boy at his Aunt Rosie's wedding. After he hears his friend Dorcas tell horror stories about what went wrong at her Uncle Fred's wedding. I, Harry, am going to a wedding. I am getting married, Harry, my Aunt Rose said. Mr. Baxter will be your Uncle Leo. Congratulations, I said. I've never had an uncle before. Aunt Rose and I have known Mr. Baxter for a long time. He plays the tuba in Red Rose Quintet and Rosie's five-piece band. And Rose sings and plays the piano. I tell my friend Dorcas the news. I've never been to a wedding, I say. Really? She says. I went to a wedding once. My Uncle Fred got married. It was awful. Awful how? I ask her. Dorcas tells me. There were a zillion relatives, she says. Most of them I'd never seen before. They pinched my cheeks and said, isn't she sweet? My, how she's grown. I was the flower girl. My dress was long and hard and prickly. It tripped me whenever I walked. The flowers were roses with thorns that stuck me. Losing the ring was the worst part. You lost the ring? I asked. It was my brother Bill's fault, Dorcas says. Carrying the ring was his job. But he came down with chicken pox. You're next in line, my Uncle Fred told me. But I'm the flower girl, I said. Dorcas will be glad to do both, my mother told him. I walked down the aisle carefully, holding the roses in one hand and the wedding band on a velvet pillow in the other. Just as I got to the altar, the pillow tilted. The ring slipped off it, rolled under a table, stuck in a crack in the floor. The entire wedding party wound up on their hands and knees underneath the table, looking for the ring. After they found it, they couldn't get it out. Uncle Fred borrowed my mother's ring and married Aunt Esther with it. After the ceremony, they moved the table and pried up the ring with a fork. It's still a little bent, believe me. Aunt Esther wasn't pleased. The next week, while she and Uncle were on their honeymoon, I was home in bed with chickenpox. I think I'll skip Aunt Rosie's wedding. I tell my father that night and stay at home with the girl. Girl is my dog. She lives with my Aunt Rose because my father is allergic, but she's spending the honeymoon with us. Skip, my father says. You're Aunt Rosie's ring boy. No one told me that, I tell him. I just did right now, he said. Anyway, if you stay home, you'll be at the wedding. Aunt Rose is getting married here in our backyard. How will everybody fit? I ask. Everybody who? My father says. I tell him what Dorcas told me. When her Uncle Fred got married, a zillion people came. So far as I know, my father says the only people coming here are a few close relatives and friends. Yes, but what about the ring? I ask. I tell him what happened to Dorcas. My father sighs. Please, Harry. He said, believe me, such a thing won't happen twice. Right, I think. But something else could happen, even worse. Your aunt could move away and take girl with her, Dorcas says when I tell her. That would be worse. Why would she want to do that? I ask. Most people move away after they get married, Dorcas explains. My Uncle Fred, for instance, lived next door to us until he got married. Then Aunt Esther saw an ad in the paper, circus help wanted, it read. I've always wanted to be in the circus, she said. It turned out. So had Uncle Fred. They both got jobs selling tickets. Now Aunt Esther's a clown. Uncle Fred feeds the elephants and hoses them down. The only time we see them is when the circus comes to town. After school, I visit my Aunt Rose. Hi, Harry. she says. I'm glad you're here. I can use a hand with the dusting. We start on her piano. The girl puts her front paws on the bench and watches. What's on your mind, Harry? Aunt Rose asks. You look a little worried. Who, me? I answer. The girl yawns. I think girl's worried about where she'll live when you move away, I tell Aunt Rose. Aunt Rose looks surprised. I'm not moving any place, she said. I tell her, but Dorcas told me. I see, said Aunt Rose. Some people move after they get married. Uncle Leo, for instance. When we get back from our honeymoon in Bermuda, he's moving in here. I'm glad to hear it. That's when I bring up the ring. I've decided to carry it in my pocket, I tell Aunt Rose. I think that way I probably won't drop it. Aunt Rose smiles. Don't worry, she says. I'm sure you won't. I only hope it doesn't rain. That would be awful. Yes, I think. The guests would get wet. The cake would be warm. Fortunately, Aunt Rose's wedding day is sunny. Benches have been put in the yard, the cake and the food have been set out on the long table. Beside the dogwood tree, there is a canopy. They will be married underneath it. The girl is safely inside the house when the guests begin arriving. My, how Harry has grown, a few of them say. So far, no one has pinched my cheek. The musicians from Aunt Rose's band are here. Luke on bass, the drummer Lucille, and Herbert, who plays French horn. The music begins. I put my hand in my pocket to be sure the ring is still there. I hold on to it tightly. Uncle Leo's niece, Denise, walks down the aisle first. Holding the flowers, I go next. After me come the bridesmaids and ushers, and then Uncle Leo and my father, who is best man. The band swings into Here Comes the Bride, and Rose starts down the aisle. Holding onto Grandpa's arm, she is dressed all in white, with a train and a veil. Aunt Rose looks beautiful. The guests all smile, then some of them begin to giggle. I see why. Girl is walking down the aisle, right behind Aunt Rose and Grandpa. I wonder how she got out of the house. When Aunt Rose and Grandpa stop beside Uncle Leo, the girl keeps going. She sits in the shade of the dogwood tree and watches the ceremony. The part was through just as I'm about to hand Uncle Leo the ring. Mr. Parker's cat, Tulip, who lives next door, squeezes through the fence to see what's going on. Girl sees her, barks and runs over. Tulip sees girl. She puts up a bark back and hisses. Then she dashes for the dogwood tree. With girl at her heels, Tulip races up the tree trunk. She stretches out on a high branch and looks down. Girl sits at the foot of the tree and looks up. The wedding has come to a standstill. No one seems to know what to do. Uncle Leo clears his throat. Harry, if you have the ring, I think the wedding can proceed. I hand him the ring. He winks at me. He doesn't look even a little angry. He puts the ring on Aunt Rose's finger and kisses her. The band begins to play. I take girl inside the house. Miss Parker comes over from the next door and coaxes Tulip down from the trees. I'm so sorry about the disturbance, she says to Aunt Rose. It was a lovely wedding anyway. And you are a beautiful bride. Then holding on to a tulip with one hand, she reaches out with the other and pinches Aunt Rose's cheek. All the guests are eating and talking and dancing. Aunt Rose and I, Uncle Leo and my father, Denise and her parents join hands and dance together in a circle. When the wedding is over and the guests have gone home, Uncle Leo gives me a wristwatch. It is to thank you, he says, for being such a good ring boy and nephew. Thank you, I tell him. How was the wedding? Dorca asks the next day when I show her my wristwatch. Fine, I say. I didn't drop the ring. Miss Parker's cat caused a disturbance. But other than that, nothing bad happened. We all had a very good time. Even Girl did. A few days later, a postcard arrives from Bermuda. On one side is a picture of Aunt Rose and Uncle Leo waving. On the other side it says, we're having a wonderful time. We miss you all. Give Girl a pat for us. Love, Aunt Rose and Uncle Leo. The end.